Good day, all. We are just going to give a minute or two for those who are joining a couple of minutes late, and then we'll get started. All right. Well, I figure we'll get started now, and some folks who are joining us a little bit later can catch up with us. I'm very excited to have everyone here. Welcome, welcome. My name is Erica Nelson, and on behalf of the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, my team at the Signal program, and my team at the Home Geo program, I'm really excited that everybody is here to join our webinar series, Expanding the Frontiers of Atrocity Prevention with Spatial Strategies. So, as many of you know, the atrocity prevention landscape is facing really unprecedented challenges in 2025. We have our funding crisis with USAID programs. Their closures have eliminated over $47 million in annual prevention funding. With this, we're seeing a downsizing in key organizations and their personnel, and this really threatens a lot of kind of the knowledge and the wisdom and institutional processes that we have accumulated to date. Along with that, climate-driven conflicts and technological warfare continues to escalate and demand really new approaches. So rather than simply adapting to these changes, we're leveraging them to fundamentally reimagine atrocity prevention for the next decade. This webinar series explores new frontiers of atrocity prevention. Over the course of 3 webinars, our presenters will highlight how geospatial tools can anticipate crises and shape ethical approaches to documentation, prevention, and response. This is our agenda for today. So, of course, we'll welcome you to the Atrocity Prevention Lab. Then we'll turn it over to our keynote speaker. Then we will have 2 really compelling talks alongside that: synergism between law and geospatial for conflict prevention in the DRC, and then conflict early warning in a post-USAID landscape. And then we'll wrap things up. Firstly, the Atrocity Prevention Lab. The Atrocity Prevention Lab is a project to strengthen innovation, collaboration, and impact of atrocity and conflict prevention work through the integration of spatial methods and technologies. This project was launched in 2023 after an extensive gap analysis of the field by the Signal Program on Human Security and Technology at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. One of our lines of effort at the APL is building out our community of practice. This community of practice is a space for early warning, early action practitioners, technology developers, and academic researchers to come together to share relevant ideas and really break down silos. Why did we think that this was a really important thing to do? Well, based upon our gap analysis, there was a significant gap between what is being developed by researchers and technologists in high-income countries and what methods are really being utilized by community, local, or regional EWEA organizations. This COP is an effort to bridge this digital divide and really to support a more efficient, cost-effective impact for those populations affected by conflict and atrocities. The Atrocity Prevention Lab has many different activities. We convene for collaboration and connection, for near-peer mentorship, and really to break down those silos. We convene conferences and webinars, not unlike this one, to really highlight what other people are doing so that we can I would say, spotlight and raise up the work of our COP, and so we can learn from each other. We also provide geospatial support for organizations that are looking to build out their spatial capacity. We have a LinkedIn for near real-time conversations, updates, and then we have a website with resources. So I highly recommend that you use your fancy little computer phones and visit the APL website and the LinkedIn and join us in our COP. And Jillian, if you don't mind at some point sharing those in the chat. A couple of disclaimers and reminders. So our speakers have been invited to share their personal perspectives based on their own scholarship and experience, and they do not speak for Harvard. And of course, please engage. Please kind of share who you are, what you're doing, where you're working from in the chat. Please put questions in the Q&A section, and we will have a couple of times for discussion. So raise your hand. We'll call on you to come off mute, and we can have a discussion about some of these really incredible topics that our speakers will be presenting today. Talking about our speakers, first and foremost is our keynote, Ms. Tammy Palacios. She is a steering committee member on the Atrocity Prevention Lab. She's a senior fellow at the Center on Terrorism, Extremism, and Counterterrorism at Middlebury Institute. She's a research fellow at Modern War Institute at West Point, and she is the CEO of Priority Sustainable Solutions, LLC. Our next speaker will be Ronald Sawanga. Mr. Sawanga is associated with Loyola University Chicago. He is the Pro-Law Alumni Network Board of Representatives. He also is the program assistant for International Bridges to Justice, and he's on the research committee of the East Africa Law Society. He's also the senior legal consultant for Fountain Advocates, apologies. And then last but not least is the illustrious Jillian Elliott. Ms. Elliott is our program coordinator here at the Signal program and is really integral to all things that we do, both within the APL and within the Signal program writ large at HHI. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Ms. Palacios for her very inspirational keynote speech.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the Atrocity Prevention Lab for the great work that you do. It's been a pleasure convening with the other steering committee members and being involved. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. It is my pleasure to speak to you all today about geospatial strategies and professionalizing prevention. This is something that's been at the center of my work for the past handful of years and is, I think, truly tantamount to the opportunities that we have today. We spoke of challenges, and we're all aware of a changing landscape. But I think with that is opportunities to shape what that reality looks like. We have a lot of sectors that work on overlapping topics, whether that's peace building, humanitarian, early warning has its own subsector, conflict, atrocity, conflict analysts, and a lot of these experts and practitioners and policymakers I think there's an opportunity for everyone to come together, and geospatial analysis and mapping is, I believe, at the core of that opportunity to bridge those sectors and to build a more practical and sustainable development, security, peace, security future. So I'll be touching briefly on threat assessment tools, but I'm really going to be diving into a case study of work that I've been doing on JNM, the Al-Qaeda affiliate in the Sahel. Many of you may have heard of the recent fuel blockades and socioeconomic encircling of Bamako. That actually follows a lot of activity that JNM has been conducting for the past handful of years. That's not a new insurgency or a new tactic. It's just been scaled up. And that is the kind of foresight and analysis and understanding of bad actor activity that we can gain from doing mapping of not just the violent activity, but also nonviolent activity, mapping of actors and such. But I wanted to start with really outlining why we're having this webinar series, why APL exists, why these sectors exist. Mass atrocities are rampant. This is just in the past few years or this year. These stories, Sudan and Gaza, Ethiopia, DRC, Central African Republic, Ukraine, Burkina Faso, and this is just a handful. And I think that's important when we're talking about solutions. We unfortunately can't just talk about solutions without also outlining the problems, and the problems are pervasive and clear and mapped, and that's the the value add and the need for geospatial analysis and mapping is to outline, unfortunately, just how horrible these events are, the extent, the breadth, the continuity of them, and it's all because humans have only so much capacity for horror, right? So unfortunately, it's sometimes easy for I believe viewers that aren't either physically experiencing or professionals in this space to not be inundated. But we have to outline what it is that we're advocating for policy or program implementation for. Sometimes I think with the data on the problems as well. Uh, Early warning, early response is something that is a tool used by not just the Signals program, but obviously the many local partners that HHI and Signals program and these other outlets have. It's really core. It's not just using of geospatial tools like SREs, GIS, ArcGIS, but it's really made possible with these local partnerships and the sharing of that technology and training. And here's a mix of just a handful of those local with those maybe larger software tools. WANIP is an excellent example of a network of about 700 civil society organizations across West Africa that have then, built a relationship with ECOWAS and have been really a true example of successful early warning, early response. But it's through that bottom up, top down relationships with policymakers and dissemination of the information, as well as the maintaining of those local partnerships on the ground. I was able to meet with their team in Accra in 2022, and they're considered a rather strong partner, but even they were facing issues with maintaining that local breadth of data collection at that time, and that was before the shifts in USAID and international decrease in funding to these programs. What I really want to get into with this case study is the opportunity to professionalize prevention. And this is where I see a true cross-sector integrating and kind of stepping out of silos. Early warning, atrocity, prevention, conflict analysts, military studies, civil military, all of these sectors that have shared objectives. And this data on both mapping actors, problems, activity of bad actors, and solutions to do things like offer foresight and the direction and opportunities to step in and mitigate further atrocities and prevent mass atrocities from being pervasive and deeply rooted is in data. And it's multi-levels. And that's where I think there's room to grow in atrocity prevention. Mapping is realizing where whose role and what data it is that they need. Policymakers, the decision makers needing more bottom line up front, top line, clear explanations of what steps need to be taken from this data and information to step in a timely manner, and then engaging with essentially just the right information with the right people. There is a difference between prioritizing prevention or early warning and the prevention or early warning systems data collection and the work itself. there's still a responsibility for outlining the need and to advocate for timeliness. That is something that is not always obvious, and the researchers and the local actors on the ground really are the best people to keep track of those indicators. They have the pulse better than anyone, and so that needs to be a live and constant connection. Data collection and that local partnership isn't just to get that data and then to clean it, process it, and publish it. That relationship and that finger on the pulse is absolutely imperative to timely and appropriate interventions. So I'm going to just talk about two reports really quickly, and then I have just an ending slide. The first report is supporting civil society organizations to mitigate the spread of terrorism in the Sahel. This is a report that I was working on back starting in 2021, and was essentially to help map, pardon me, civil society organizations that were especially smaller and underconnected across West Africa. I took a lot of, this is representation. There are over 400 that were mapped that were less connected to the United Nations or USAID or other networks. And I was able to brief this to the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism Executive Directorate, as well as offices across USAID, State Department, OTI, DoD, AFRICOM. And this is the opportunity, right? Is connecting the local actors that exist with the policymakers that maybe don't want to have boots on the ground. So it's providing opportunities of if the US or other international actors have hesitation to act in a certain way, this is the solution. It's not always advocating for funding for a program, but listening to the needs of the country, of the world, listening to the demand signals and giving them information in a way that responds to the problems that they have. The second report is preventing another Al-Qaeda affiliated quasi-state, countering Jainim, and that Al-Qaeda affiliate in the Sahel. And this was essentially mapping the low and non-kinetic activity of the Al-Qaeda affiliate in order to hopefully help outline their future direction and mitigate the activity that we're seeing now. There's a big opportunity, I believe, to map geospatially and use geospatial analysis to not just track violent activity and deaths of civilians, but also threat of violence and activity such as a road blockade or an arbitrary arrest, whether that results in injury or not. And that's actually where prevention sits. So what I am really excited to leave you guys all with is I think the opportunities that we are facing to bridge silos and open silos and sectors, and also a call to in this time especially respect and hold local actor relationships to the importance that they have. There is a lot that we can do in how we map and how we publish and how we brief, but I think it is just as important to keep impact at center and realize that how we work can be just as important as the work itself. So whenever I can, I will bring local partners to the table, whether it's a hybrid convening or quote them because they are the representatives of their insights, and I'm just the deliverer. And if you would like to get in touch with me, please feel free. And I'm very excited for Ronald Zaronga's presentation.
Thank you, Tammy, for that. Ronald, as you get your presentation shared with the group. One of the things, Tammy, that I reflect upon kind of time and time again is kind of best practices for engaging local actors. And maybe we can think about that as part of the conversation after Ronald and Jillian give their presentations. And we could think about like the best way to support geospatial capacity, data collection, and like integration into the greater atrocity prevention space. But it looks like Ronald has his presentation all set and ready to go. So I will hand it over to him, and hopefully we can have that conversation a little bit later.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity and for putting all this together. So I'll take you through what I'll call a research-based project, but from both the theoretical point of view, and then also share with you how we can try to translate this into a practical kind of aspect that can be used in everyday life to prevent conflicts in the DRC and even other parts of the world. So to start with, I'll be looking at the synergism between the law and geospatial for conflict prevention in DRC specifically. And to start with, I look at a given central question, which is how can geospatial intelligence be synergized with existing international and domestic legal frameworks to bridge the persistent warning response gap and enable proactive, legally defensible conflict prevention in the Eastern DRC specifically. So this is the central research question that I'm trying to navigate here, and I'm trying to look at the prevention paradox in a way. So we have a robust legal mandate to protect civilians, and we have also what I would say from a consistent operational failure to act on those kind of warnings based on the data that prevails. So the problem is not the absence of the law itself, but the absence of objective, verifiable evidence to trigger the law to be able to work. So this research tries to explore the geospatial intelligence as a solution to that specific evidentiary problem. So as you may see in this graph, what this graph shows in terms of navigating the research question or the central question, the bars compare three verified displacement figures from three different authoritative sources. That is the UNHCR, the OCHA, and the UNICEF. These are all reports. One for UNHCR is from 2025, and the one for OCHA is for March 2025, just recently, and UNICEF, it's for June 2025. So this means almost the entire displacement burden of DRC is concentrated in one geographic corridor, if I may say, in the eastern borderline. And with that, the caves are the epicenter in that kind of manner, the way you see the graph. So why does this matter if I'm to translate it from the data point of view to the legal point of view? So the graph demonstrates that displacement is not randomly distributed if you really look at it closely across the country. So it's geographically predictable and persistent, and that the concentrated population in the same area over time, it proves the crisis is structural and not accidental in nature. So how this data can be converted into action, that is in terms of anticipatory and operational, because of this kind of displacement concentration is predictable, it can guide preventative prioritization. That is to say, a focus on geospatial monitoring on known escalation zones, that is overlay a displacement movement with satellite imagery to detect early triggers. So with the use of these kind of alerts as evidence to activate legal prevention mechanisms at the international level, that is at the UN level, to try to instigate protection of civilian mandates. And then also we have at the domestic level, that is in terms of the DRC law, that is currently known as 25/045 to see a formal PGSI submission to planning of the council. So in short, this graph tries to portray or prove that the problem is not the lack of data. It is the lack of a system to convert this data into timely prevention action. So this visual supports the central question by showing that warnings are visible and measurable, yet unused, hence the prevention paradox. Moving on just to this kind of illustration, just to illustrate more of the central research question that I'm trying to navigate. If you look at just this kind of example, just to look at the map itself, it tries to portray the graphic information systems. That is, if you look at the armed conflict location, event and data projected by the SELED. And the method that is being used here is the hotspot analysis. And it identifies statistically significant clusters of violence, while at the same time, it maps conflict intensity, often correlation with mineral sites. That is where is this kind of conflict coming from. So it tries also to forecast or give some kind of predictive analytics and mechanisms in terms of the models that can be also trained on historical conflict data, that is in terms of population density and terrain and poverty levels, to be able to calculate the probability of future conflict-specific areas. So with this kind of information, it can also be used in terms of navigating prevention of conflict. So in terms of the paper structure and design rationale, in terms of designing the paper or of research, so I look at, of course, the prevention paradox. So I deconstruct the DRC conflict systems and the warning response gap that paralyze the mandate itself that is within the UN to protect civilians. And then the geospatial tool outlines the technical tools for a multiple stage process, because sometimes when you look at different kinds of data, they are interpreted differently depending on either their past, present, or their future. That's in terms of predictive analytics and also remote sensoring, and as well as the hotspot analysis from the past. And then I look at also the synergy model, that is in terms of details on how this geospatial provides the evidentiary bridge to trigger legal mandate, that is from both the international and domestic point of view. Then the ethical frontiers also are very essential. That is the critical analysis of risk of evidence, participation, and prediction, as well as data sovereignty, which is also mandatory in terms of being able to understand the background of a given kind of conflict. So this, in a way, will demonstrate precisely how the technical tools solve the legal and operational problem. And the ethical critique is integrated throughout to ensure proposed solutions are responsible and grounded in the do no harm principle. Going forward with the current academic research and relevancy, I look at the current research focus. That is, we have high-level political analysis scholarship that does exist and is rich in analyzing the failure of top-down peace agreements. That's, for example, the Lusaka Agreement, peace agreement framework. And then we have also the reactive conflict mapping. That is a strong body of work from all these kind of geospatial users to map historical violence, identifying hotspots and correlation, especially within the mineral sites, and as well as the past atrocity documentation, that is in terms of human rights groups, as well as effectively using the satellite imagery as forensic evidence to document atrocities after they occur. Then in terms of the relevance of this research, I look at this existing research provides, in a way, the essential data sources and the methodologies that occur in terms of the models on how they are built upon. A key takeaway from this is that the relevance is foundational in a way, and it provides data for our action model. However, it generally stops short of providing a forward-looking operational model for preemptive action. So in that kind of sense, I would say that this proves that the academia maps happens, but it does not use that data to act before the harm occurs. Because, of course, there's a lot of research that can be conducted and presented, but at the end of the day, if that research is not turned into a prevention kind of mechanism, then at the end of the day, we don't get the solution. So just to give you also, in terms of the current academic research relevancy, the graph you see itself tries to visualize a displacement concentration in the Eastern DRC using two independent concentration in the Eastern DRC, that is to say, verifiable data sets. So we have 6.7 million internally displaced across Eastern Province. That is according to the report of OCHA, that is the March 2025 report. And we have a 4.0 million internally displaced located specifically in the north and south. And if you look at that itself, that is from the UNICEF report of June 2025, the circles show proportional intensity, and the epicenter of displacement is not random in itself, and it consistently clusters in the same geography. So what does this mean? The map reveals a predictable spatial pattern, displacement repeatedly accumulated in the same provinces and along the same conflict corridors. This means the violence is not emerging everywhere. It is emerging in a known escalation zone. So just having this kind of knowledge, it can be able to trigger the legal mandate that the UN has in terms of protecting civilians. And how this translates into an anticipatory action is that because the displacement concentration is geographically predictable in a way, the geospatial monitoring can be used to trigger preventative measures before escalation. That is, even if they're looked at in terms of the satellite data that shows new troops movements, road closures, as well as PGS maps that show who owns or uses the land for what purpose, as well as, because currently the DRC has that kind of law. And then we have combined with, this combination can produce evidence based on alerts that can push the UN mandate to protect civilians, and as well as the local land use councils to intervene early. So what this graph tries to portray is that it's not just showing where displacement is, but it's showing where prevention should be prioritized in a way. So moving forward, I look at the literature gap as well as the contribution that this research can bring to the table. So the literature is highly solid in a way that scholars of international law who understand this kind of mandates, as well as the geospatial specialists in terms of building on the maps, and the DRC experts who understand grassroots land conflict are not in conversation. That is to say, the technical analysis lacks a legal operational framework, and the legal analysis lacks technical and verifiable triggers. That is in terms of identifying the gap. Then in terms of the paper contribution, it creates the evidentiary bridge. That's to say, for the first time, this kind of research operationalizes the geospatial data to specific legal imminent threat to trigger the UN mandate to protect civilians. So it highlights vertical synergy, and this is the first major kind of analysis to connect international tools such as satellites to the newly promulgated DRC land use planning law of 2025. So it also tries, in a way, empowers local actors, that it moves beyond a top-down solution by showing how participatory geospatial gains legal force under the new law, allowing communities to resolve land conflict before they escalate. So why is this important? Why is closing this gap matter? Why does it matter? Without this kind of integration, the UN remains reactive in a way. And the root cause of conflict, that is in terms of the grassroots land disputes, will remain unaddressed. And this that's why this paper provides a practical and legally grounded operational model for both peacekeepers and local communities. In terms of the literature gap as well as the paper contribution, if you look at this graph, the graph shows the timeline, and it shows 4 major legal and policy instruments over 25 years. That is, if you look at the Lusaka ceasefire agreement of 1999 and the peace framework agreement of 2013, as well as the UNSC resolution 2765 of 2024, and finally the DRC Land Use Planning Law of 2025. Each instrument adds a layer of authority from ceasefire obligation of 1999 to a regional reform commitment of 2013, sorry. So to mandate, that is to give explicit mandate to the UN explicit protection of civilians, that is to say, the mandate of 2024. And finally, a domestic mechanism that can give legal force to communities generated in terms of the geospatial evidence in terms of the 2025 current statistics and data. So what does this mean, or what are the key insights for this? For 25 years, the legal framework existed, but none of these instruments defined how evidence can trigger prevention action. So the system had law in place, but lacked a legal evidentiary trigger, meaning actors could see early warning signals, but could not act on them without legal risk. So how pairing can be done in terms of the geospatial as well as the law in terms of synergizing the two. The 2025 DRC law, land law use, introducing a missing operational piece, and it gives legal standing to participatory geospatial as well as geospatial evidence submitted by communities to local land use councils. When geospatial detects early change, that is in terms of the troop movements, as well as scenarios such as land grabbing, the geospatial maps document who owns or uses land. This pairing converts early warnings into lawful prevention action. And at the both UN level, as well as the protection, that is in terms of protection of civilian mandate, as well as the local domestic level of land use at the councils. So the core argument in this would be that the geospatial intelligence is not just a technical tool for mapping. It is the essential evidentiary link required to activate the latent preventative power within existing legal frameworks. So in terms of the significance it brings to board, it provides a tangible pathway to shift from a reactive crisis management to a proactive kind of management in terms of data-driven prevention. So it addresses the root cause of violence and not just the symptoms, and it provides a replicable model that builds a resilient, locally owned piece from the ground up. So to take you through as well in terms of the core argument and significance, when you look at that table, the table tries to compare 4 major legal and policy instruments that I've tried to describe before, and that govern conflict response in the DRC. So when you look at the Lusaka ceasefire agreement of 1999, that stopped fighting between, but did not empower prevention action. Then we have the PSC framework in the Addis Ababa of 2013, which introduced political reform benchmarks, which is also still reactive in a way. We have the UN Security Council resolution of 2765 of 2024, which also gives the mandate to the UN to protect civilians. And it mandates allowing preemptive action when threat is proven. And then we have now the current DRC land use law number 25 of 045 of 2025. So this is the first domestic law that legally recognizes community maps in a way and creates land use councils that can address disputes. So in a way, each column shows that the instrument allows or does not allow in terms of preventative action, land rights recognition, and local planning structures, explicit as well as explicit civilian protection. So what this means is that international agreements historically recognize the problem, but more created a mechanism, but none created a mechanism to act early. So just to sum this up, I would say in terms of the key takeaways from the findings point of view, the problem is informational translation. And also another finding is that when you look at the DRC land use law, it's a game changer in a way if it's translated into the geospatial kind of preventative measure the way I've tried to describe. So the third finding is that ethics are operational, not theoretical. So we must plan the double-edged sword of visibility. I think I'll leave it to that and welcome any kind of questions in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ronald. That was just exceptional in outlining everything from the problem of translation and silos and just like really important academic work that is not being translated. And how do we get that academic work translated into action? And I love this concept of ethics being operational, not just theoretical. I think there's a lot that was in there that is something that we all need to percolate on and reflect on and continue to think about. But in the meantime, I'm actually going to have Ms. Elliott present some of our work here from the Signal program in the APL, looking at conflict early warning in a post-US aid landscape. Thanks, Ronald.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay? Yes, okay, great. So I will kick off my presentation then. Thank you, Ronald. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Erica, for getting us started today. I will be presenting on some research that we conducted at the Atrocity Prevention Lab as part of the Signal program here at Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. And this focuses on conflict early warning in a post-USAID landscape. So, as many of you know, at the beginning of this year, the US government overhauled its foreign policy agenda after months of foreign aid freezes and stop work orders. These funding cuts were made permanent with the canceling of a majority of health, humanitarian, and development programs, as well as the dismantling of the US Agency for International Development, also known as USAID. So, as a research program working with folks in conflict affected regions at the intersection of atrocity, early warning, and technology, we felt that we had the obligation to understand how this was affecting our partners. So we undertook a mixed methods survey where we surveyed 32 voluntary participants to get a holistic answer to the following question: what are the impacts of the USAID freeze and funding cuts on early warning and early action systems and atrocity prevention activities? And what strategies are being adopted in response to those funding cuts? We also followed up with a selection of participants who opted to share their emails with us and ended up conducting 4 qualitative interviews via Zoom. So these study objectives were twofold. The first, to document the impact of USAID funding cuts on conflict and atrocity early warning, early action organizations, their work, and the populations they serve, and to understand how organizations are responding or adapting to the funding cuts. So just to speak briefly towards our respondents' background, they were primarily those working for national non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations. They were primarily those whose work focuses on security, conflict transformation, and peace building. And they were primarily those in sub-Saharan Africa. So I will walk through 4 key takeaways that were highlighted from our community through this study. And the first one, and probably this is not a surprise to anybody, but USAID was the funding backbone. So 62% of surveyed organizations depended on USAID, and half have already cut staff or programs. So I'm including here a couple of quotes from those we interviewed. One participant from Nigeria said about 70% of peace building organizations in the country majorly rely on USAID. Another participant said that without funding, we are operating as more volunteers here in South Sudan. So in many ways, this affirms what we already knew, but gives more practitioner testimony to the fact that peace building and conflict prevention efforts, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, have been tremendously impacted in negative ways. Programs have been halted, operation locations and health facilities have been shut down. Staff cannot be paid and are driven to continue their work by passion, and some organizations have had to close their doors completely. The second takeaway is that early warning and early action systems are faltering. 3 out of 4 organizations managing conflict early warning systems say those platforms might shut down. And here we have another quote. While these early warning systems are in place, they require funding. And so it's not really functioning the way it should, and it is affecting peace and security in a specific area in Nigeria. So we know from the survey responses that increased violence and increased protection issues have been an impact of the funding cuts. More than half of respondents report this. The third key takeaway, years of community trust are unraveling. So we have respondents who have reported that community members feel abandoned, and credibility built over years is eroding. So one person we interviewed who is an academic in the US but worked closely with a NGO in Uganda, heard from that NGO it had taken 8 years for our NGO to build up the level of trust and personal relationships in an extremely rural area in Uganda where they were operating a health clinic for young girls and women. That clinic entirely relied on USAID funding and has had to shut down as a result of the cuts. Again, hearing from Nigeria, you can't even go to the communities. Some of them don't trust us. They think we collected the money and decided to take advantage of them. So what this really exemplifies is that aid is not a spigot that can be turned on or off. Rather, capacity, infrastructure, and trust building all take time. This appears to be the funding crisis from this administration appears to be a multi-generational rupture in the humanitarian ecosystem. And that's not to say that it won't ever come back to its previous capacity, but if and when it does, it will look very different in its new form. And the fourth and final key takeaway is that coping strategies help, but come with trade-offs. So 56% of our respondents are searching for new donors. 44% are partnering more. Some have moved training online. And, through the interviews and through the survey responses, we found that, or we learned from our community that there is a big appetite for network strengthening, not only in terms of re-strategizing and reprioritizing, but also for solidarity and, just relying on one another to find strength and resilience in this time. So organizations who are looking for funding elsewhere are also reporting that the competition for funds has increased tremendously. And I have a few summary or conclusion points here. I just want to say that I regret that the learnings from our community of practice could not be more positive, as I'm sure everyone in this webinar does too. Ultimately, our lab aims to center the challenges that conflict prevention and peace building practitioners face. And the intended outcomes of this study are really to provide an enhanced understanding among practitioners and policymakers of the human and institutional consequences of USAID aid reductions. We want to inform donors, decision makers, and stakeholders about priority risks and urgent needs. And we want to strengthen sector-wide advocacy and support for resilience building. And with that, I will close out this presentation and just say that there is an article forthcoming that goes into further detail of all of the survey findings and what we learned by gathering information from our community of practice. I want to thank our community of practice for taking part in this survey. If you filled out the Kobo form, if you chose to sit in a Zoom meeting in an interview with us, thank you so much. And we will be sure to communicate with you all when that report comes out. And I will end there.
Jillian, just heartbreaking, and frustrating, and we don't have a ton of time, so I'm just going to hand it over to Dr. Greeno to finish us out with our call to action, really, kind of one of the most important components of this.
Hi, everyone, and thank you. First of all, thank you everyone for joining. Jillian, I don't know if I can still, if the slides are actually on Erica's still.
Oh, are you
They're
trying to
mine.
share your screen?
I am.
Are you able to do so now?
Yeah, it's still not granting me access.
Okay.
That's okay. I can actually just share and talk and make some points.
While you talk, I will pull them up.
Well, thank you, everyone, and I'm going to use Jillian's presentation really as a takeoff point. I agree with Erica. This is heartbreaking, and we sort of started this webinar with those challenges, laying out those challenges around funding and around knowledge loss. I think Jillian's research laid that out in practical terms, and to hear the voices from the field. It certainly is. It's daunting. It's sobering. One thing I would say is we are all in this together. And that said, when I hear Tammy, when I hear Ronald, I see so much opportunity in how we move forward. Tammy, thank you so much for sort of laying out the vision for this webinar series for us. I think you did it beautifully. Especially looking at the tools and the innovations that we can start thinking about as we move forward. And then Ronald, the very practical way that we think about translating it to the field, bringing it to policymakers is much more impactful. So let's look at this now through a lens of what we can do. What are the opportunities out there? And the fact that we have this amazing group even here with us talking about this today is just an example of the need to network and work together. I will say this, we all of our institutions are facing the same challenge in terms of doing more with less, particularly given the funding issues. That said, it means being innovative. It means thinking strategically. And I think, Ronald, I really appreciate the way you've used these tools to be able to say we can still bring truth to power using our research and still leveraging local populations to do that. One of the beautiful things about maps is that everything happens in time and space. And if you show a compelling map to a policymaker, it wakes them up, right? And it also brings local participants into the discussion and links them to the policymakers. And I think, you know, we don't, if we're thinking, you need to think innovatively and using more or less, we can use these tools, I think, to show the cost effectiveness of our work. And we can also engage other disciplines, you know, whether it's climate relation or, you know, again, Ronald showed, you know, where minerals are located and in relationship to conflict. You know, all those things, bringing those disciplines together, we can do more with less, and to show our stakeholders and our donors that we can make an impact with these. So that's a challenge, I think, before us, but I think it's very, very doable. Now, how do we do that? Well, you know, the temptation in these times is to feel like we have to retract, right? To pull back just to survive. But I would say and I think we would all agree that, you know, we are stronger together. And, you know, networking is going to be one of those things. APL, for us, that's one of our missions, is to convene these networks of shared mission. A lot of it is around communicating, convening, building awareness, and sharing technological, how we use these technological tools, how our research can impact, and we learn from each other when we do that. Let's explore how our joint missions can be leveraged in additive ways together. And let's teach each other. And I think these webinars are one way to do that, certainly, but there are so many, many other ways. Let's engage in joint research together. And I think in doing so, we will show our value added for, most importantly, the populations at risk, which is our primary stakeholder, but also to development banks, to private foundations, to companies, to civil society organizations, all of which have vested interest in what we're doing. So I want to use what was discussed today. Thank you, all of you, to Tammy, to Ronald, to Jillian, to set that stage for us, but to give you a vision for what we can do. And I think, you know, again, leveraging our innovation and our skills, our tools, particularly through the spatial tools, you know, to model, for predictive analysis, or just to show critical stakeholders like policymakers what we can do and how that will make an impact. It is a challenge, and showing impact always takes a bit of work, but we can do this all together. And on that note, I would certainly invite all of you back next week, because we're going to continue this conversation with our next panel. I think Dr. Samantha Lakin is on this call today, and we're looking forward to having her. She's a noted genocide and transitional justice researcher. And with Peter Wamachi, who's a program officer for Kenya's National Steering Committee on Peacebuilding and Management. He'll be with us. And then Dr. Nate Haken, who's the vice president for Fund for Peace. So it'd be, again, a nice, I think, collegial and you know, multilateral discussion as well. The focus is going to be a little bit more. We're going to take it up to a little more detail around, you know, preserving knowledge, and again through organizational networks, and sharing best practice. I think, again, we are stronger together. So let's continue to build and corroborate and leverage what we are each doing in a way that really kind of preserves this work. And then I will hand it to my colleagues.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you literally to everybody on this call, literally everyone in our community of practice, all of the folks that have presented today, Jillian, Tammy, Ronald, to the entire team. The call to action is not any stronger than what it is right now. The situation is, I think there are moments of opportunity here. And I don't want to be too dire about it, but this is the space. These are the people. You are the community. And we can come together and actually make some impact. So please, please, please be in touch with us. through either the LinkedIn, the website, our email, reach out to us. But also, if you have the capacity to come to our next webinar, we would love to have you. That is next Wednesday, November 12th. Greg spoke about it, and it will be informative, lovely, and inspirational. And with that, I'll say good day. Thank you, everybody, for your hard work.